But
Hi, everybody. My name is Bruce Montgomery, and this is my colleague, Tracy Priest.
hello, everybody.
And as you guys know, we're with The Road to Retail. Today's episode, we're going to talk about what to include in your presentation. You've crossed a really important bridge, and you've gotten your meeting with the retailer you've been targeting. So how are you going to make the most out of this 30 to 60 minutes you have? And remember, even though hopefully we have COVID behind us, it could be Zoom, it could be in person. So you got to make sure you're ready to roll either way. So before we get into this, not only do Tracy and I have 30 years doing this stuff, we've made a ton of mistakes. We'd like to help you. But during this process, we also interviewed buyers from about a dozen of the largest retailers in food, drug, and mass to get their perspectives on what they like to see in presentations, the kind of things that are a waste, what irritates them, at what point do they want to put a knitting needle through their eye because they're getting drowned in data. So we're trying to show you these 12 to 15 pages. And folks, that's what they want. 12 to 15 pages. What should be in there? Now, you can have as many pages as you want in the appendix. If you're someone who, I got to be ready to answer any question on the spot, or if you don't have an 80-page deck, you'll start like twitching. But the core presentation, when you're talking to these folks, is 12 to 15 pages. So keep that in mind. It could probably be a little bit longer. 12 is aggressive, but I used to send people in with 80 pages, and I thought that was awesome. And then you'd be in there and it's like, I got 60 minutes, less than a minute a page. That's no questions from the buyer. And why are they like looking at their watch every 2 minutes? Because I was boring the hell out of them. Okay. So here we go. So the first thing you need to do is show that you have some insights that prove you know the consumer and you know your brand. Okay. You need to be able to tell that buyer something they couldn't possibly know. But let's get a few things straight. Buyers know a lot. They have access to a ton of data. However, what they don't have is the time to go super, super deep in every category or subcategory that they're responsible for managing. So let's take something like skincare. Okay, you have a unique skincare brand, or so you think, and so the buyer hopes because they've given you an hour of their time. What makes yours different? Is it an ingredient? Is it a claim you have? But get to the point and prove it. People believe statistics, they believe numbers. Now, we already talked about this before, and if you've watched any of our podcasts, this is one of Tracy and my bumper stickers. Your product has to be different from what is already being carried. One of the buyers we interviewed, they said, I don't need any more cut and paste brands. One of the piñatas Tracy and I use is gluten-free chocolate chip cookies. There's a lot of them out there. I'm a cookie expert. I like them. I've tried them all. If you make them, I will try them. However, how is it different? Remember, the category manager cares about their category performance way more than they care about your brand. By bringing you into the set, which is what they call where your product will reside, will the performance of their category be better or worse than it was before? You also need to have a unique brand story, right? Great brands generally have great stories. Talk about the origin, the founder, about a special claim, a certification, an area of the country or world where your key ingredient came from. It's those kinds of things that are a hook that will get people to listen. Tracy?
Yeah, Bruce, I think the most important thing I want to just highlight here is this is your opportunity right out of the gate to share your brand story. You're probably the brand founder, and explain to the buyer why you've created this brand. So I'll give you, two examples. There's a brand that worked on that was a gluten-free pasta meal. And the founder created it because her kids had a lot of allergies and they were very restricted on what they could eat. So she created this pasta meal in her kitchen for her kids to eat. And then she mass produced it and created a brand. So those are the kinds of things that the buyer wants to really hear about is what's the story? What's the why behind your brand?
Great. That's a great example, Trace. The other thing to remember, and it's a mistake lots of people have made, and I'm at the top of the list. When you go into these meetings, there's two things you have to keep in mind. One, allow plenty of time for questions. The questions will be telling about whether the buyer is tracking with you, whether that person gets it. You know, watch their body language. Are they nodding? Are they smiling? Are they making notes on their deck if you've given them an old school copy? Or are they looking at their watch and tapping their foot because you're either boring them or you're not letting them talk? So buyers also will throw out, you know, ideas that could prove very helpful. And Tracy and I will talk at a later time about how to put together your marketing or demand plan. And you need plans at each of the retailers where you have distribution. The other thing to keep in mind, and this one's tough, it's really tough. Buyers at these big retailers, when they're seeing new suppliers or any supplier, they're usually seeing a bunch in a day. And unless you're fortunate to have like the first meeting of the day, these folks can get behind. So always know what parts of your deck or presentation you can skim through even faster or cut out entirely. One of the things I like to do is when a meeting starts, I'll say, let's say Tracy's a buyer. I'd say, hey, Tracy, we still good to 11? And he might say, yeah, we're good till 11. Or he might say, you know what, I'm really behind. If there's a way we can, if you can give me back 15 minutes, I'd appreciate it. Not what you want to hear, but it's what you need to do. So always kind of troubleshoot. Or they might show up at your meeting room late and they're going to end at 11 because they got to do something to get back on track. The other thing about the deck and the meetings that you'll do, try not to use every single minute talking. Again, ask for questions. You don't have to do it at the end of every single page, but again, look for those cues that, you know, they're really hooked onto something, or they look kind of confused over what you're saying, or ask them what they think along the way. And here's the other one, and then I'm going to turn it over to Tracy. If they ask you a question that you do not know the answer to, don't make stuff up. Say, hey, Tracy, that's a really good question. I'm going to take that down and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. And we've talked about the importance of follow-up, but what does that do? It communicates you're not going to make stuff up. It communicates you're going to get them an answer, and it gives you a chance to contact them again. All important stuff. Tracy?
Yeah, just again, the highlight here, I think in what Bruce has said is you need to make sure that it's a conversation, not just sitting there. Do not make sure that you know your presentation backwards and forwards. Don't sit there and read your presentation. I've seen it. Bruce has seen it. It just does not look good. Know it cold, be able to recite it without any pages, and make sure that you really have a dialogue with that buyer.
Very, very true. There's nothing more painful than reading a deck to somebody. It's kind of disgraceful. So moving on, what are the details in the plan that you need to bring? Okay, Tracy and I call it a demand plan. The demand plan really has two components. There's the marketing plan where you're going to press against the consumer externally, and the trade marketing plan of what you're going to do within each specific retailer. Today, we're going to talk about the marketing plan out against the consumer. What are you going to do to drive awareness and trial so that your brand doesn't just gather dust on the shelf? And one of the things Tracy said for 1 second that's really interesting is if you guys have a small emerging brand, you very well may be the founder, the inventor, but there's others of you out there that may have a challenger brand. For some reason, it's just never gotten the time and attention it needs, or possibly you just took over a dormant brand from a bigger company, and now you have to bring this baby back to life. So some of the challenges are all the same, but there's some different avenues that all lead you onto the same road to retail. So you know where you're coming from, but a lot of the solutions are similar. So one of the things you'll need to do is you're going to need to prove that you're going to drive awareness and trial. Bring media plans, bring copies of your advertising, bring screenshots of your website, talk about what you're doing with social, talk about what you're doing with influencers. Are you doing sampling, in-store sampling? Are you sponsoring the NFL? Whatever you're doing to drive awareness is going to be very important. During our interviews with retailers, One retailer from a very large retailer said at different times they have asked new brands to show them a balance sheet or some sort of cash statement to prove they had the money to generate the awareness and drive the plan that they were talking about. So I had not heard that before, but knowing this person, I can totally see them doing that. Tracy?
Yeah, so I think the big aha moment here for this episode, Bruce, is that you have to prove to the buyer that you have a plan to pull the product off the shelf. And one of our bumper stickers here at Road to Retail is, it's not about sell in, but sell through. So this is really where you have to shine, show samples of your website, show this is your time for some show and tell, show your influencers, show your Instagram page, but you've got to show the buyer and convince the buyer that you have a plan to pull the product off the shelf and get it into a consumer's cart. That's really the key here for showing your demand, your demand plan. Also make sure that you're showing your product. Again, show and tell. They want to know that this product is real, that you've done your homework. It has a UPC, it has drug facts, whatever needs to be on the packaging. Even if this is a meeting that is virtual with a buyer, have your show and tell with you and show it on the screen. That's not a bad thing.
Nope, not at all. One of the other comments we got from one of the buyers we interviewed, they said, you need to prove to me that you are committed to this brand before I commit to this brand.
Right.
So it gets back to what Tracy's saying, examples of your work, show them a media plan, show them live mock-ups of things. When it comes to packaging, one of the points Tracy just made, and this is becoming pretty much mandatory. I mean, back in the day, you could show mock-ups. Retailers now want to see final packaging with a scannable UPC so that they know it's real. If we go in there with, something that, our kid did at the kitchen table with a Sharpie set, hey, pretend this is real. Okay, I'm not in the pretend business. Okay. Right. So this stuff needs to really look like it's going to go. And those are things that build your credibility. The other thing you need to keep track of here is a lot of retailers won't ask, but some will, as you meet with them again, or if you get onto a rhythm where you can send them an update now and then, reaffirm that you're actually doing what you said you're going to do. Tracy, I think we're here to touch on trade marketing maybe just for a second.
Yeah, absolutely. So not only are you going to want to have a consumer plan or a demand plan, as Bruce said, you're going to want to have a trade marketing plan. What do we mean by that? I mean, how are you going to support the brand specifically with the retailer? The retailer, in many instances, are evaluated on how many trade dollars they bring into their category. What do I mean by trade marketing? Sampling, temporary price reductions, end cap displays, coupons, all of that stuff that the retailer really will become the salesperson and sell you on participating in those programs that they have. Doesn't mean that you have to say yes to all of them, but you need to have a trade marketing calendar or at least a trade support page in your presentation that says, here, Mr. Retailer, is how my brand is going to support you and the programs that we are going to participate in. It may be as simple as doing a quarterly temporary price reduction at 15%, and it may be as well all the way to couponing, in-store demos, front-end displays. There's all kinds of programs that the retailer has, advertising, whether they have an in-store flyer or advertising on their website. Again, all kinds of programs that you can participate in. Be prepared to say, this is how I'm going to support my brand at your retailer. Bruce?
Yep. Thank you. As Tracy and I said earlier, we'll do a whole other episode on trade marketing because it's very important. And as Tracy said, a lot of retailers, one of their key metrics that drive their job review is how they harvest dollars from their supplier base. Okay, but we'll talk about how to deal with that at another time. So let's move on to pricing. So in your presentation, if you haven't already kind of wet the whistle of the buyer in such a way that this is why you even got the meeting in the first place. Pricing's a big deal. Okay. So you're going to want to have some sort of market price survey. And if you're a brand new brand to a category, you're going to want to have the brands that are already in the category with their key SKUs. Again, for the newer people, an SKU is the different sizes of a product, a 12 count, a 24 count. And you're going to want to have different price points from different retailers so that you can show that the price you are proposing is reasonable and realistic. The other thing that this will test you on, and this will happen way before you get into the meeting, you now should have a really good handle on your cost of goods, and you know what it costs. You have an idea of how much money you're going to need to drive awareness. You know what your sales agent may charge you. And again, sales agents are not really an expense. They help you win. So I've seen people all the time that choose to fail for free than spend money to win. I don't even understand those people. So yeah, they have $5 extra as they lay down in the hole in the cemetery. Congratulations. So the retail price survey, but the other thing this does is if you're going to go to market through a distributor, you have to take into account the distributor markup and then the margin, which you should already know what this retailer is going to want. And then you will see where you're starting to land in that competitive set. Now, it can be okay to be a slight premium, but you better be able to explain why, because the buyer will say, Tracy, you're brand new. Well, who's going to pay up for something they've never heard of? Well, I have this claim, I have this special ingredient, I have this story, and we're spending all this money. That could be okay. If you come in at the very bottom, that could be exciting too, but you better make sure that you have done all of your math correctly, because I can tell you this, and Tracy and I talk about this all the time. It is very hard to take your price up on a new item because you made an error. I frankly, it's kind of like the Loch Ness Monster. I've heard about it, but I've never seen an example live. You can occasionally take your price down, but that has its own mess. So you really want to make sure that your pricing is nailed. And by doing that market survey, you see where you fit. If you think about any market where the pricing is kind of like a big corral where you'd keep, horses and cattle, et cetera, you kind of got to be in that corral. Because if you're an outlier, you're going to spend a lot of time explaining why you're an outlier. Tracy?
Well, first of all, Bruce, I love the reference to the Loch Ness Monster. So here's, again, you need to make sure that in this part of the presentation that you communicate to the buyer that you know that retailer. So again, one of the things we didn't touch on is make sure you get into stores before your meeting. Know what that section looks like, know what the price points are, just like Bruce mentioned. I would even take some pictures of the set and include them in your presentation if you can, and say, hey, here's your set. Here's what your average pricing is. Here's where I would fall into that, my positioning in the pricing. And that's, I think, going to be very impressive to the retailer buyer that says, wow, this guy really did his homework.
Yeah. And as Tracy said, the photos are great. And depending upon the retailer, and if it's a national retailer that's going to give you a couple hundred store test in certain markets, but they're not where you live, and if you can't afford to buy IRI or Nielsen data, which tracks all the products that are scanned at retailers, if you have a friend or relative, or if you want to buy a plane ticket, go to that market and do it in the market where you will be tested. Okay, because the more real and current your data is, first off, you'll feel better, and the buyer will know that you are investing the time. One other thing about pricing, this part of any discussion with a retailer can get really uncomfortable. So you got to have your act together. You have to know that you've incorporated, if you have a distributor, your distributor's markup. You have to know what the target margin is for the retailer you're talking to. And after you've done all that, you got to make sure that there's enough money left for you that you can actually run your business. So some retailers, it's just in their DNA. They tell you your price is too high. So you need to be prepared to defend your price, and not lowering your price is an option. And a lot of retailers will respect that. But if someone says, Tracy, you need to come down $2 a unit or we're done. If mathematically you can't do it, good grief, don't say yes.
Right.
Don't say yes, because it'll be a bloodbath and it'll all be yours. They won't feel any pain. Tracy, next, please.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to add there, Bruce, is make sure that you understand that the retailer controls the pricing. So
Yes.
when we say MSRP, manufacturer suggested retail price, suggested underlined. So make sure you realize that you may say, hey, my suggested retail price is $9.99. The retailer may decide to run it at, retail it at $9.49. That's their prerogative. Just remember that it's really their decision at the end of the day.
Right. And some retailers, again, if you're working with a sales agent, you'll know this. If you work up your price and it comes out to, let's say $9.99, there are certain retailers that price at certain levels. It might be $9.49 or everything ends in a 7, so presenting an MSRP that shows, again, you're kind of in the club and these things, a good sales agent can help you out. All right.
Yeah.
But that's a really good point. The retailer sets the price. You can talk to your blue in the face what it should be, and that buyer is going to do what they want to do.
Exactly. So one other thing you want to include in your presentation is elements from your go-to-market strategy. In another episode, we will talk about what a go-to-market strategy is. But like we said, you're going to want to include your MSRP. You're also going to want to include what are your case pack dimensions and all of those kinds of information. Just have it on one page in a little box in an Excel spreadsheet on your presentation, so that you can show the buyer that your case pack isn't 36 or 48 that would never go on a shelf. So you want to really, again, show that you know what you're doing and that your case packs and all of your specs are going to work with them in the retail space.
Yeah. And another thing about what Tracy's talking about, some of this stuff is really unsexy, but it's vital. Just the other day, I was working with a brand and we had to fill out the spec sheet for one of the large retailers. And again, a lot of times other people have done that, but my hands are deep in the patient on this one. But we had to record the unit UPC, so the individual carton, right, the inner wrap, which would be like maybe shrink wrap 3 or 4, the inner UPC, the case UPC. So how many, as Tracy just said, what's your case pack? If you have a very expensive product, your case pack better not be big and you better have an inner pack. We can talk about that when we talk trade marketing. And then lastly, even the pallet had a UPC. So that's how specific a lot of these big retailers are. They're trying to track inventory. They're trying to manage inventory dollars, and they're trying to thread the needle by having enough inventory to service the shoppers, but without carrying too much and tying up too much cash. Tracy, I think we're ready for the big finish.
Absolutely. So thanks for joining us today. I hope that you've enjoyed this conversation. Hopefully you found it educational. And please follow us on our Spotify channel, our iTunes, or on LinkedIn. And you can listen to other episodes that we've recorded with friends and colleagues, and also talked about other topics that I think you would find interesting. So thanks again for joining us, everybody.
Good luck out there.